Hello, everyone. When we think of the dangers that haunted the age of exploration, our minds conjure up vivid images. We see colossal waves splintering masts, the black flags of pirates cresting the horizon, and perhaps even the shadowy forms of mythical sea monsters lurking in the abyss of uncharted waters. We picture desperate battles, cannonballs tearing through wooden hulls, and men fighting for their lives against the raw, untamed fury of nature and the greed of their fellow man. But what if I told you the greatest killer, the most feared entity on the high seas, was none of these? What if the true monster wasn't something you could fight with a cutlass or outrun with a full sail? It was a phantom that boarded every ship, from the grandest galleon to the humblest caravel, without invitation. It was an invisible plague that sailors called the sea demon, a curse that rotted men from the inside out, turning vibrant, hardened explorers into listless, broken shells of their former selves. Imagine this: you're months from shore, a profound weariness settles into your bones, a fatigue so deep no amount of sleep can cure it. Then your gums begin to swell, turning a sickening shade of purple-black, your teeth loosening in their sockets until you can pluck them out with your fingers. The slightest bump leaves a ghastly, dark bruise on your skin. And then comes the most terrifying symptom of all: old wound scars you've carried for years as badges of honor from past battles begin to ache, then split open, weeping blood, as if the injury had just occurred. Your own body is betraying you, literally unwriting its own history of healing. This was the reality for millions of sailors. This was the true terror of the sea, a force that killed more Today, we unravel the chilling mystery of this ghost plague, a disease that held empires hostage and shaped the course of history. This is the story of scurvy. The story begins not just with a ship, but with a dream. The dream of a new world, of untold riches, of a direct route to the spice-laden shores of the East. In the late 15th century, this dream burned brightest in Portugal. In 1497, he set sail from Lisbon with 4 ships and the hopes of a nation on his shoulders. His mission: to do what no one, not even the great Columbus, had managed to do, to round Africa and reach India by sea. The initial leg of the journey was a testament to their courage. They battled treacherous currents, violent storms off the Cape of Good Hope, and navigated They were explorers, adventurers, facing the known dangers of the world ahead. On they believed the greatest challenges were outside the ship. They were wrong. As they crossed the vast, empty expanse of the Indian Ocean, a new enemy emerged, one they had no charts for, no weapons to fight. It began with a simple listlessness. Men who could climb the highest rigging with ease now struggled to haul a single rope. Their mood soured. Laughter died on the decks, replaced by a sullen, brooding silence. The ship's surgeon noted it in his log. A strange melancholy had befallen the crew. Then the physical signs appeared: the swollen, bleeding gums, the foul breath that spoke of internal decay, the blotches on the skin, dark and ugly like pressed grapes. Men would lie in their hammocks, their legs bloated to the size of tree trunks, their joints screaming in agony, unable to move. The psychological toll was even worse. Paranoia festered in the cramped, fetid quarters below deck. Was it a curse laid upon them by the merchants of Venice who feared Portugal's new trade route? Was it God's punishment for their greed? The men grew suspicious of the water, of the food, of each other. Fights broke out over nothing. The discipline that holds a ship together began to fray. By the time da Gama reached India, he had already buried many of his men at sea. But the true horror was yet to come. The return journey was a floating nightmare. With his crew weakened and demoralized, the ship was a ghost of its former self. Of the 107, da Gama returned a hero. He had opened up a sea route to unimaginable wealth and cemented Portugal's place as a global power. But his triumph was built on a mountain of corpses. In his logbooks, amidst the entries of winds and currents, was a bewildered, terrified account of this phantom illness that had decimated his crew. He had conquered the ocean, but he had been defeated by a shadow. He had given the demon a name, Scurvy, but to name it was not to understand it. For the next 300 years, that name would be a death sentence whispered in fear on the decks of every long-haul vessel as the age of exploration exploded. So did the death toll Ferdinand Magellan, the first to circumnavigate the globe, embarked on an odyssey of breathtaking ambition. His journey was one of history's greatest feats of navigation. It was also one, as his ships crossed the impossibly vast Pacific, their supplies dwindled to nothing. The official account from his chronicler, Antonio Pigafetta, is chilling. He wrote, "We ate biscuit, but in truth it was biscuit no longer, but a powder full of worms. It stank strongly of rat's urine. We drank yellow water, already several days putrid. We also ate certain ox hides that covered the top of the mainyard, and we ate sawdust from boards. But starvation was the least of their worries. Scurvy ran rampant through the crew. Pigafetta described their gums swelling so much they grew over their teeth, leaving them unable to eat even the rotten food they had. Of the 270 men who set out with Magellan, only 18 skeletal survivors. They had circled the entire planet, only to be brought to their knees by an enemy they carried within their own bodies. The problem grew so catastrophic that it became an accepted cost of business. Navies and trading companies factored in a 50% loss of life from scurvy on any long voyage. It was simply the price of empire, the toll the sea demanded. Think about that. For every 2 sailors who signed on for not because of a French cannonball or a Caribbean hurricane, but because of this inexorable, wasting disease, a voyage became a lottery of death. Men would write their wills before casting off, saying their final goodbyes, not knowing if they would ever see their families again. The greatest minds of the era were stumped. What caused this affliction? The theories were as plentiful as they were useless. Some doctors believed it was caused by the foul air, the miasma that collected in the damp, crowded holds of ships. Others blamed the salty sea air itself, or the constant dampness. Many believed it was a result of idleness and despair, a moral failing. A popular theory was that it was a venereal disease passed from man to man in the close quarters. The proposed cures: sailors were forced to drink concoctions of sulfuric acid, known as elixir of vitriol, which would burn their mouths and throats. Others were given doses of mercury, a deadly neurotoxin. One particularly cruel remedy involved burying a sick man in sand up to his neck, believing the earth would draw out the putrid humours. More often than not, the man would simply die of exposure, or the Dutch explorer Jacob van Neck, witnessing the horror firsthand in 1599, wrote a description that captures the sheer helplessness of the age. It is a very rare thing for anyone to recover from this disease at sea. The miserable patient, lying in his own filth, suffers from such a depression of spirits that he is, as it were, continually sighing and feels a great oppression on his heart. A world of incredible bravery and discovery, shadowed by a creeping, incomprehensible death. For centuries, the sea demon reigned supreme, its power seemingly absolute. But as the world moved from an age of superstition to an age of reason, a new kind of hero was about to enter the fray. Not a captain with a sword, but a doctor with a question. His name was James Lind. The ship is HMS Salisbury, a 50-gun vessel of the British Royal Navy, patrolling the choppy waters of the English Channel. On board, a young Scottish surgeon named James Lind walks the sick bay, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sweet, sickly stench of decay. All around him are the victims of the sea demon, men with swollen black limbs, with teeth rattling in their jaws, with vacant, hopeless eyes. Lind was a man of the Enlightenment, a believer in observation, logic, and evidence. He had read the old texts, the theories about miasma and melancholy, and found them wanting. He had seen too many good men die. He was frustrated by the ignorance, infuriated by the helplessness. He decided that watching and waiting, he would conduct an experiment. What Lind did next is now considered one of the first controlled clinical trials in the history of medicine. His methods were simple, elegant, and revolutionary. He found 12 sailors all suffering from scurvy, their symptoms as identical as he could find. He housed them in the same part of the ship and gave them all the same basic diet. The only difference would be the cure he administered. Pair number 1 was given a quart of cider each day. Pair number 2, 25 drops of elixir of vitriol. Pair number 3 received 2 spoonfuls of vinegar, 3 times a day. Pair number 4 had to drink a half pint of seawater daily. The 5th pair was given a paste of garlic, mustard seed, and other herbs. And then there was the final pair. To them, Lind gave a simple prescription, 2 oranges. For the first few days, there was no change. The men on the vinegar and the sulfuric acid complained of stomach pains. The men drinking seawater grew weaker. The men on the cider felt perhaps a little better, but the improvement was negligible. Despair began to set in. Was this, too, another dead end? But then something extraordinary happened. The 2 men eating the citrus fruits began to stir. The swelling in their gums began to recede. On the 6th day, one of the men, the one who had been the most gravely ill, was well enough to get out of his hammock and report for duty. The change was so swift, so dramatic, it seemed like a miracle. While the other 10 men continued to languish, this pair was visibly, undeniably cured. Lind had done it. He had stared into the abyss of this centuries. The cure wasn't some complex alchemical formula or a prayer to a distant god. It was a fruit, simple, humble, and utterly effective. The sea demon had a weakness. Lind was ecstatic. He meticulously recorded his findings and in 1753 published his landmark work, A Treatise of the Scurvy. In its pages he laid out his experiment and his conclusion with irrefutable clarity. Citrus fruit cured and prevented scurvy. He had handed the world the key to defeating its most relentless maritime killer. The British Admiralty, the most powerful naval authority on the planet, now had the weapon it needed to save thousands of its sailors and ensure its dominance of the seas. And what did they do with this world, changing? For nearly 50 years, Lind's treatise gathered dust on shelves. The report was read, noted, and then utterly ignored. Sailors continued to die in horrific numbers, their gums blackening and their wounds reopening, while the cure was sitting in plain sight, printed in black and white. Why? The answer is a frustrating, tragic tale of human nature. It was a cocktail of logistical challenges, scientific confusion, and sheer institutional arrogance. Firstly, the logistics were daunting. How could the Navy possibly supply thousands of men on long voyages with fresh fruit? Oranges and lemons were expensive, and more importantly, they spoiled. It was a practical nightmare that the Admiralty's bureaucracy couldn't or would. Secondly, Lind himself inadvertently muddied the waters. In his treatise, trying to find a way to preserve the fruit's healing properties, he recommended boiling the lemon juice down into a thick syrup. A rub, unfortunately, we now know that this process, the prolonged heating, destroys vitamin C, the very molecule that made it effective. So when the Navy did half-heartedly try his rub, the results were disappointing, further fueling their skepticism. But the biggest obstacle was pride. The Lords of the Admiralty, the esteemed physicians of the Royal College, simply could not accept that a problem that had baffled the greatest minds for 3 centuries could be solved by something as mundane as a lemon. It felt too simple, too folksy. They preferred their complex, impressive-sounding theories of contagion and atmospheric chemistry. They dismissed Lind as just another ship surgeon with a pet theory. The battle between a lone doctor and an entire empire is a testament to the slow, often agonizing march of progress. If you are finding this forgotten chapter of history compelling, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more of these. The sea demon continued its grim harvest, all because of human stubbornness. It would take another kind of visionary, not a doctor but a navigator, to finally put the theory into practice. Enter Captain James Cook. If Vasco da Gama represented the raw, brute force ambition of the early age of exploration, Cook was the embodiment of its enlightened scientific evolution. He was a master cartographer, a brilliant navigator, and a meticulous planner. But his greatest legacy was his profound, almost obsessive, concern for the health and well-being of his crew. He had read Lind's work and the accounts of other explorers. He was keenly aware of the scurvy threat, and was determined that it would not claim his men. When he set sail on his first epic voyage to the Pacific in 1768 aboard HMS Endeavour, he was not just on a mission of discovery, He was on a mission to conquer the sea demon once and for all. Cook turned his ship into a floating laboratory. He was a staunch believer in hygiene, a radical concept at the time. He insisted on a level of cleanliness on his ship that was unheard of, ordering the decks to be scrubbed, the sailors' bedding to be aired out, and fumigating the lower decks with smoke and vinegar. But his main focus was diet. He knew the answer lay in what his men ate. He packed his ship with every potential anti-scurvy food he could get his hands on. He brought tons of sauerkraut, the German-style fermented cabbage, believing its acidic nature would fight the putrefaction of scurvy. He loaded barrels of portable soup, a type of dehydrated broth, and a syrupy extract of malt. He did bring a quantity of Lynn's citrus rob, but like the Admiralty, he didn't put all his faith in it. His greatest challenge wasn't stocking the food, but getting his sailors to eat it. These were men of habit, used to a diet of salted beef and hardtack biscuit. They eyed the strange, sour-smelling sauerkraut with deep suspicion. At first, they refused to touch it. Cook, a brilliant psychologist as well as a captain, employed a clever trick. He didn't order them to eat it. Instead, he had the sauerkraut served every day at the officers' table, making it seem like a privilege, a delicacy reserved for the elite. Soon enough, the crew's curiosity and desire for what they couldn't have got the better of them, and they began demanding their share. For 3 years, the Endeavour sailed through uncharted waters, mapping New Zealand and the east coast of Australia and crossing the vastness of the Pacific. It was one of the longest sea voyages ever undertaken. And the result, not a single man was lost to scurvy. It was a revolutionary achievement, an outcome so extraordinary that it stunned the world. Cook became a living legend, celebrated not just for the lands he discovered, but for the lives he saved. He had proven that scurvy was not an inevitable curse. It was a beatable foe. Because Cook had used so many different methods, the cleanliness, the malt, the sauerkraut, he himself wasn't entirely sure which one had been the silver bullet. He personally gave most of the credit to the wort of malt, and his immense fame and authority meant that his opinion overshadowed Lynn's earlier, more accurate discovery. The specific role of citrus fruits remained a footnote. Cook had changed. The final, decisive victory would have to wait for a moment of national crisis. The end of the 18th century, Britain was locked in a titanic, globe-spanning struggle with revolutionary France. The Royal Navy was Britain's wooden walls, its only defense against invasion and the protector of its sprawling empire. But the Navy had a critical weakness. Its ships were still being ravaged by scurvy. While Cook's voyages offered hope, his methods were not universally adopted. Fleets would be crippled mid-campaign, with a third or even half of their crew too sick to man the guns or handle the sails. Britain was losing more sailors to a dietary deficiency than to the French cannons. The situation was desperate. The Admiralty, finally shaken from its complacency, was ready to... The man who finally got their attention was another forward, thinking physician Sir Gilbert Blane. Blane had served in the Caribbean fleet and had seen the devastation of scurvy firsthand. He was a disciple of Lynn's work and had the data to back it up. He conducted his own fleet-wide experiment in 1780, showing conclusively that ships supplied with lemons and oranges had dramatically lower rates of the... Crucially, Blane had something Lynn did not: political influence. He was a respected physician with friends in high places. He presented his evidence to the Admiralty not as a curious theory, but as a matter of urgent national security. He argued that a healthy navy was a victorious navy. Lose your sailors to scurvy, and you will lose the war to Napoleon. This time the message got through. A regular ration of lemon juice, preserved with a bit of rum, was to be issued to every sailor in the Royal Navy. The effect was nothing short of miraculous. Within a year, scurvy had all but vanished from the British fleet. Hospitals that had once been overflowing with scorbutic patients were now empty. The Royal Navy suddenly had a massive strategic advantage. Its ships could stay at sea for longer, blockade enemy ports more effectively, and its sailors were healthier and stronger than any of their rivals. This simple, long-overdue dietary change played a significant, if unsung, role in Britain's ultimate victory in the Napoleonic Wars. The sailors of other nations would mock the British for their strange habit, calling them limeys, a nickname. But the limeys were the ones manning the guns at the Battle of Trafalgar, healthy and strong, while their enemies were still falling victim to the old sea demon. The demon was finally, definitively defeated. But the mystery of its true nature remained. What was this magical substance in citrus fruit? It would take another century and a half, with the dawn of modern nutritional science, to find the killer. The sea demon that had claimed an estimated 2 million lives was the lack of a single fragile molecule, ascorbic acid. Vitamin C, we now know that the human body, unlike most other animals, cannot produce its own vitamin C. We must get it from our diet. This molecule is essential for the synthesis of collagen, the protein that acts as the glue holding our bodies together. Without vitamin C, the glue dissolves. The body literally begins to fall apart. This is why the symptoms were so horrific. The bleeding gums, the walls of the capillaries were disintegrating, the blotches on the skin, spontaneous bleeding under the surface, and the old wounds reopening. This was the most direct evidence of the collapse. The collagen that had formed the scar tissue was breaking down, and the body had no way to repair. The terror that had haunted the seas for centuries was, in the end, a simple deficiency. The monster was a void, an absence of something vital. The cure was not a feat of complex medicine, but a return to a natural balance, a balance lost during long months at sea, subsisting on a diet of preserved meat and dry biscuits. The story of scurvy is more than just a medical footnote in the history of it's a story about the devastating cost of ignorance and the incredible power of a single simple idea. It's a tale of how human ambition can lead us into new worlds, but how we can be laid low by the things we fail to understand about ourselves. It's a testament to the quiet heroism of men like James Lind, who chose evidence over dogma, and the practical genius of men like James Cook, who turned theory into life. And it's a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest, most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the dark, but the ones that hide in plain sight, waiting for us to see the simple truth that has been there all along. That is all for today's video. If you like this video, please subscribe, like it, and support us. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.